David Williams. Wow.
Oh, thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Okay, so we've got up next Rick Tucker. Give a warm welcome.
You still got the energy for another? Along with everyone else, thank you, Carl. Thanks for setting this up. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here. This is going to be a little bit different from what's come before. Not least because I'm a writer of novels. I write fiction. Now, fiction doesn't necessarily mean it's not true. It's just the vehicle within which truths can be expressed. And I'm the author of 3 novels. 2 here, two which have been published, one which is currently in the hands of an agent, and if anyone's ever tried to engage with agents, they'll know how difficult that can be. But I'm hopeful for it. And I'm also writing I'm currently writing my 4th novel as well. Large parts of the first 2 books, A Dog Unchained and Under the Flamboyant Tree, are set in Trinidad and Tobago, which is where my wife is from and where I have visited many, many times, and where I have the most enormous family you can imagine. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Trinidad and Tobago later, but I'm going to tell you a bit about myself and my background and some of the themes from my life which have gone into my novels, into my fiction. I'm a former mental health professional, and it's really interesting listening to what David was saying there about how the people who should be engaging with a lot of young people are not present in assessments, decision making and everything like that in the field of mental health. And I experienced some extraordinary things in my time, 25 odd years working in that field, which I won't go into in great detail here, but it changed my life forever. So much of that experience of working in mental health informs my writing, as well as how I personally look at and deal with life. I've had to deal with my own mental ill health, so themes around mental health and addiction feature quite regularly in my books. Some of the other themes which are in my books, how we are brought up and how our early childhood experiences, which you mentioned there, about if you can sort it before the age of 7, you've done well. You can sort it afterwards, but often an awful lot of damage has been done by then. So how we're brought up, how our early childhood experiences determine how we may turn out in life and how we deal with the problems that we face and the people that we meet. Another theme in my books is that of creativity, what it means to be driven by this phenomenon that is having to be created. Why are we so impelled to do this? All my life I have felt that I have no choice in the matter but to be an artist of some sort. And the years of suppressing that, which I did, it nearly did for me and contributed to depressive illnesses. Another theme which comes, which I include in my books a lot, is that of morality, or rather the age-old human conundrum of what's right, what's wrong when we're faced with difficult circumstances, and how the way we respond to those difficult circumstances and challenges in our life can determine what happens to us and our loved ones for the rest of our lives. And another big theme in the books is the searching for roots. I moved around a lot as a child. I didn't really feel I came from anywhere. London is probably the place I would call home, but I don't really feel I come from anywhere in particular. Not knowing what your roots are makes you restless, it makes you wonder. And it makes you think, well, what is home? Is home a physical entity or is it a spiritual one? Well, spiritual might not be the word you would choose for that, but it's a feeling inside that you have found somewhere where you're comfortable, where you can be you. It's not just about being in your bricks and mortar. And coming from being married to someone from the Caribbean, my daughter is now 38. She grew up as a mixed race kid who had an awful lot of problems with finding her identity. She struggled at school because of it. She had a hard time. And it was going to Trinidad and being accepted into this incredible community there. First time she went was 10 months on, we took her there. But she started to realise something about who she was and understand this sort of concept of what is really home. A little bit about the books, what they're about. A Dog Unchained is the first book I wrote, and it's about an artist, a white man who grew up in Trinidad and Tobago and then moved back to the UK. And he goes back to Trinidad to find friends and loved ones from his youth. He's a recovering drug addict, and he's battling alcohol addiction as well. So the theme of creativity coupled with addiction, so often the two go together. It's also explored. In Under the Flamboyant Tree, Under the Flamboyant Tree is about a mixed race woman called Camille who lives in Paris, who leaves her husband and goes in search of her roots by travelling to Trinidad alone. And her romantic vision of how that will be is brutally shattered very early on in her visit there. And she has to take refuge with a great aunt of hers, an old woman who practices obeah, who then looks after her and helps her see what the real world is. And there's also a love story running through it, which is integral to Camille's story. Her journey is integral to her understanding who she is and where she comes from. The unpublished novel features a flawed, morally questionable, yet ultimately noble protagonist who experienced the traumas of war as a teenager and who must then use his bravery and humanity to resist the horrors of the eugenicists and the Nazis in the lead up to World War II. People with mental ill health and learning disabilities and those who weren't of the chosen race were subjected to horrific attempts at genetic engineering by the Nazis, and some incredible cruelty was carried out on people on some of the most vulnerable people in society. And so, with my background in mental health, it was important that I included that in this story. So I worked for many years in the field of mental health, mostly in secure mental health services, including prisons and young offender institutions. And I witnessed some things that I will never forget. I met some people I'll never forget. And I was exposed to some extremes of human behaviour that I didn't know existed until I had to deal with them. It was rich, it was inspiring, it was exhausting, it was harrowing. There was an awful lot of sadness and despair in people's lives, but also an awful lot of love, laughter and humanity. But also some of the worst injustices you could ever imagine. And I know I've witnessed at hand young men being brought into mental health units by the police, battered, bleeding, handcuffed, and there's nothing wrong. They were picked up on the street, hanging around with their mates. They gave the police a bit of lip, and they got hammered, arrested, taken down the cells, beaten up, put on a section of the Mental Health Act called the 136, which is the police section, can't remember now how many hours it lasts. I think it's 72 hours, but it can then be easily converted into another section of the mental health act, which means you can stay for longer and be forced to have treatment and all sorts of things going on like that. And I'm not knocking mental health services. There's an awful lot of people who work in them who are brilliant at what they do and want to do a good job. But the system can, for no reason at all, turn you into someone who basically has your life taken from home and family and the streets into what ends up in secure mental health care. So it's not all hopeless, but you need good people working in those services. You need good people working in the community that link with those services, and it needs commitment. But at the moment, mental health services are being devastated. So you're getting people being admitted. The only beds for someone needing acute mental health care in London, they might have to go to Cornwall or Manchester or something like that, miles away from their family. That's been happening quite a lot. Anyway, it was a very rich experience. And when I had to retire on grounds of ill health, I was 55 years old, and I thought I can live all this time. I could for a while, but not for long. So I started to write again. And that amazing alchemy occurred when the unconscious mind and memory just flows out through your fingertips, and you don't have any conscious control. A whole lot of stuff starts pouring out of you. And I realised that there was so much still stored up inside me that it had to get out. I grew up moving around a lot, all of it within a loving but dysfunctional family. I'm going to be very honest about my background here. And within that family, I witnessed from a very young age mental ill health, and I didn't understand that that wasn't normal. I didn't know I was being deeply affected by this. I just thought what was happening was normal life, and that everyone experienced it, or at least understood it. How did this affect me? Well, it's a big question, but writing, painting, music, all came naturally to me. I didn't have the self-confidence or the encouragement from others to pursue it, despite getting into art school, playing in bands, writing reams of unpublished romantic poetry and stuff, you know. And I've battled with depressive illness for over 50 years now. I use drink and drugs to blunt that sharp edge and to suppress the traumas. And I had to fight in order to not succumb to addiction's welcoming and warm, but ultimately fickle and cold embrace. And that's a fight that never goes away. Now, Trinidad and Tobago is somewhere that has a deep place in my heart. It's somewhere I have many beloved and loving friends and family. Somewhere I came to realise something about roots and something about myself. My beautiful, inspirational daughter considers Trinidad and her family there as much as home as anywhere else, if not more. And my wife still considers it home, despite living here for over 50 years. I wanted to write about the richness of my experiences there, but I also wanted to write about the harsh reality of life there. You know how people who've never been to the Caribbean often imagine it's all about white sandy beaches, turquoise seas, lying in a hammock, drinking a rum punch, listening to Lovers Rock. You know, well, that exists, but it's one small part of life and culture. When I first went there in 1987, I had my mind blown. Trinidad and Tobago has a population now of about 1.5 million. About 35% of that population had Indian roots. They came from mostly East India and were brought over as indentured labourers. About 35% have African roots, who, as you know, would have been brought over as slaves originally. About 10% are mixed Indian and African, and then the rest are a whole mix of white, Chinese, Arab, you name it. So it's this amazing mix of cultures and roots. Venezuelans as well are now there because Trinidad's really close to the South American mainland, and lots of refugees and migrants, something we're seeing in this country, is also happening there. People fleeing Venezuela to get to Trinidad, and it's causing the usual problems. Trinidad's a small country without adequate resources to deal with. So my wife is of Indian heritage, in a small village where her family lived in the rural south, where Indians, Africans, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, Rastas and Christians all live. Often having marriages and families made up of two or more of those divisions. We stayed in my sister-in-law's house. There was no running water from the mains, no flushing toilet, thin wooden walls separating the rooms so there was hardly any privacy. And if you needed the toilet, you had to use a latrine, which was in a field about 50 yards away from the house. And a whole other world in itself is in that latrine. Weird insects, lizards, you name it. You're sitting there and the things you see crawling around the room. Especially if you go in the middle of the night. You've got a torchlight with you. It's extraordinary. Anyway, my sister-in-law could barely read or write. She worked all week in the fields. She took her produce to market twice a week, up to her knees in mud a lot of the time. She's a fantastic gardener. She kept chickens and ducks. She was a devoted and loving single parent. And all in all, led such a tough life. One she never complained about. She remains my greatest inspiration. The most beautiful, humble, loving, hard-working, generous person I've ever known. And sitting on her back porch in the mornings, feeling the heat rise, with my 10-month-old baby daughter in my arms, was some of the most happy times of my life. I started to realise something of what home meant. There are people there who are as close to me as anyone, and it's hard, more so for my wife and daughter, who both consider it home. As I said, it's very hard to have so many loved ones so far away. But Trinidad and Tobago isn't the place it was then. It's always had poverty in extremes, but in recent times it's led to the familiar problems of organised crime, drugs trade, gang warfare. It's got a very high murder rate, and it doesn't always feel safe to be there. It often doesn't feel safe to be there. If it was, I think we'd probably all be living there. I wanted to dispel some of the myths that people have about the Caribbean. It may be a playground for some, but for most people in many of the countries there, they lead a tough life in what is in many ways still considered the third world. And the third world, not as a derogatory term, but in terms of institutionalised corruption, the poor infrastructure in terms of public services, health, education, the judiciary, politics. But I also wanted to write about its beauty. The breathtaking flora and fauna, that amazing melting pot that is society there, the people, the food, the humour, and how I, a white man from a relatively privileged background, came to find a peace and acceptance there that I never thought would be possible. So we are a mixed race family, a mix of Trinidadian, Indian, Scottish, English, and now my beautiful twin grandsons add Jamaican into that mix. And there have been many challenges and traumas along the way. And no doubt there'll be more to come, but we're still standing and embracing that. For me, home isn't about the bricks and mortar, it's about the people around you, the people who secure you, those who are the constants in your life, who accept you for who you really are, to whom you can give love. And at the beginning of Under the Flamboyant Tree, I quote Leela Ike's song, Where I'm Coming From, where she says, when I think of where I'm coming from, looking back at where the journey began, I really have to say that I'm strong. I'm strong. So I'll read it from you. I'll just read you a bit from the first book. The village, it's a fictional name, okay, Muga, and the guy who's an artist has gone back to look for his family and friends there. He's there, it's the first morning there in his friend's house, and he's sitting on the back gallery looking out at the scene in front. It was 6:30 on his first morning in Muga village. The temperature had already reached 28 degrees, and a white sun was rising slowly as he sat on the small gallery at the back of the house. He looked out towards the untamed bush. A solitary coconut palm swayed in the centre of the scene, and he started to construct in his mind a composition based on what he was looking at. Randomly placed houses, some at different stages of being built, some board, some concrete, some a mix of the two, but none built to any uniform design, size or colour, the most impressive of which was a large concrete structure of 3 levels, several galleries, a multitude of windows, and the exterior walls painted cotton candy pink. Then there were all the add-ons dispersed haphazardly around the houses. Black plastic water tanks, chicken coops, strutting cocks chasing hens, a tethered cow, a tethered goat, dog kennels, the rusted shells of cars, disused aircon units, a small gazebo consisting of 4 uprights and a tarpaulin top standing on a pothole driveway at an angle steep enough to be defying gravity, plastic piping, bricks, sheets of galvanised iron, barbecue pits, styrofoam coolers and crates of empty beer bottles. All around it and within it, and in defiance of it, nature had risen up with an unstoppable momentum. Coconut palms, avocado trees, banana trees, plantain trees, lemon trees, lime trees, mango trees, guava trees, pawpaw trees, and any number of other trees bearing fruits you didn't recognise or know the names of. And animals, lizards and iguanas, fluorescent in green, weird and evil-looking insects and arachnids. Birds of all sizes and colours, from vultures and hawks to hummingbirds and the tiny Johnny Jump-Up, a black bird which sat on the stem of a long grass and jumped vertically in the air to catch flies. It was as though the human race had crash-landed in paradise 10,000 years before and still hadn't got a clue how to live in it. Time for another? Yeah. Just again, it's a similar thing. This is the lover of Camille goes in search of her, and he has a mate who's a Rastafarian called Israel. And again, it's similar to what I've just read. He's waking up in the morning. He thought rural Trinidad was as close to paradise as he had ever experienced. The colours, the dazzling lights, the apparently simple agrarian way of life, reminiscent of southern Europe, but with coconut palms and countless other extravagant displays of flora everywhere you looked, all so vibrant and fresh, had quickly seduced him into such a feeling of resonance and calm that he started thinking it was somewhere he could start afresh, turn his back on his long and vain quest for recognition, see it for the illusion it was, and find the peace of mind and space to lead a more honest existence. Why do musicians seek that acclaim? Addicted to the high of live performances, crushed by the come-downs. For him, being a musician was like being an addict. Maybe it was time to break the habit. Trinidad was showing him something he hadn't expected. That when you strip life bare of its adornments, all the things the first world strives for in terms of materialism and status, the really important stuff, your true self, remained. If you couldn't come to terms with that, be at peace with that, then what was the point of it all? If you were strong enough to look upon your naked self and feel comfortable, then maybe you'd cracked it. It was a little after 6 in the morning. The sky was cloudless and powder blue. A gentle breeze was blowing, and the ubiquitous song of the Kiskadee was the only sound in the world, other than a distant car horn or Israel splashing his body as he washed himself standing in front of an old oil barrel filled with water. A hibiscus with its blood-red flowers like trumpets grew defiantly through a rough patch of ground in front of the house, encircled by an old tyre. A hummingbird, only about 4 inches long, its head and throat an iridescent green, its black like polished copper scales shimmering in the sunlight, hovered as though suspended by the gods, wings a blur of shimmering indigo in front of the flower's cavity. They had arrived there in the dark of the previous night, and the strangeness of the surroundings and nighttime sounds had initially made him feel the uncertainty of something a long way out of his comfort zone. They'd sat around the fire, eating rotis filled with curried chana, while sipping rum. "Where are we?" he asked Israel. Any questions?
Yeah. What did Trinidad give you?
Well, it gave me, when my father-in-law, my wife's father, died in about 22 years ago. He left 90 living descendants. Right? So I have nieces and nephews who are taller than me. People who call me uncle, who are big men, you know. So one thing it gave me was this extended family. They call it pumpkin vine family in Trinidad. You know, like it just, so it gave me that. There's so much. It enriched me to a degree that I feel now I'm half Trinidadian. You know, it's like I was taken in, accepted, loved, and just made. You know, I feared going there as a white guy, being the only white guy in the village. I feared, you know, I'd be very self-conscious. I wouldn't be accepted. I'd find everything really, really strange. But what I got from the start, from the very, very start, was this total welcome, openness, and acceptance, literal and metaphorical hugs from people, and I've learned so much from it. And my daughter's coming to see it as her home taught me an awful lot. You know, and it was probably the best decision we ever did, was take her there as a young kid, and several times after that as well. So it's a big thing it gave me.
Thank you.
Anything else? Yeah.
I want to say that I'm a part of a challenge universal family, so everyone's my family. Okay? There's just no argument about it. Save the arguments. Right? And at the beginning of your talk, you said something about fiction, and the thing that flashed up in my head is something I can't quite quote you. But my thinking, when people say, that is just science fiction, when they read a book or watch a movie, science fiction don't fly far from science fiction. So when you are reading an excerpt of this, that's the first thing. Fiction doesn't fly far from science. Every writer, fictional writer, has themselves in there. So when I was listening to this man, you know, Camille's, whatever, I wanted to ask you, when you were writing that, did you feel it was a part of yourself, this character?
Something happens when I write, and I think other writers it happens to as well. It is like an alchemy, where you have a vague idea of plot, place, you know, but you know, it only starts to develop once you actually start writing, and then something else takes over. It's like an unconscious thing, an unconscious force, and that's what it's your truth coming out, basically. You know, it's like it surges up through you, and however long you've lived, your memories, your experiences, all the people, the tastes, the smells, everything, just start coming out. And so it is truth, and that's why I personally I prefer to write fiction, because it suits me in that sense. But and you can one part of your life, another part of your life, you can bring them together in fiction, you know, and make it a new thing, sort of thing, but it's still speaking truth.
You plan to write more?
Sorry?
Do you plan to write anything more?
Currently, I want to do a follow-up to What Happens to Camille, but at the moment, I'm currently writing a book about the mental health services in this country. But it's a novel, again, it's a fiction, and it's telling the story of three men who, all about the same age, from different backgrounds, who eventually end up being in the same place together. One of them is a professional, a nurse, and the other two are patients, one of whom is incredibly dangerous, and that's a result of his traumatized childhood, and the other is someone who is painted as being dangerous, because basically he was a tall black man who got arrested by the police, and when I was telling you earlier, put on a section 136, and thereafter started a whole career pathway, as they call it, into mental health services. So yeah, that's, again, it's this drawing on things which you want to forget about, but they come out, you have to get them out. Look, we've done that. Oh, sorry, I'm thinking.
When you say about Camille, did you write from your daughter's point of view? Did you do extra research? Being a mixed race?
Yeah, a bit of both. Certainly, some of her experiences, my daughter's experiences, feed that character, no doubt about it. But I deliberately set her as a French woman in Paris, who grew up wondering where her mother really came from. And this whole thing of it being exotic and, you know, in this child's imagination. And so then I was able to give the background to her mother, her Trinidadian-born mother, how she got to be in Paris and everything like that. So, but yeah, in answer to the question, without a doubt, the whole thing of being, not necessarily just mixed race, but this whole thing of, well, where do I actually come from? You know, what is my identity? It's very important when you're a teenager, you start secondary school and the tribes start forming, you know, and sometimes if you're mixed, you don't feel like you fit in. I mean, by the time my daughter got into Trinidad, by the time she got to secondary school, she'd been to Trinidad a few times, and she had a very authentic Caribbean experience. But it wasn't one which was necessarily accepted by people with Caribbean roots at her school. It was by some. It was a really confusing, difficult time for her to find that identity. And she has shown an incredible amount of strength to become the woman that she is now, and in a way that's the same as Camille.
Okay, alright. Can we have a round of applause? Right, gosh, a lot of thought-provoking stuff, presentations. I hope it's really sort of inspired you and given you some insight on things, and hopefully get you up here publishing or sharing your book. So that's what that's the goal, hopefully. Any questions at all? Okay, so this is
one point that I found that the common thread between all of the writers. I have to say, spirit talking now. Spirit talking is belonging. That's the word that comes. Yeah, it's it.
yeah.
Belonging.